Hi everyone, welcome back to the TechNet vlog. Joining for the first time, kindly subscribe because we share tips, tricks on how to prepare for your business analysis, project management, or even your Scrum exam, and also to become better practitioners on the field. So the last time we looked at requirement analysis and design definition, and we also looked at specified requirement and design and model requirement and design. Today we want to go into verify requirements. Okay, so what's the purpose? Why should you verify requirement even after specifying or even modeling it? So the main purpose here is to verify requirement. To the main purpose of verify requirements is to ensure that requirements and design specifications and models meet quality standards and are usable for the purpose they serve. So just you are checking quality standards and also making sure that you can use it for what you want to use it for. So then verifying requirements ensures that the requirements and design have been defined correctly. So you want to ensure that your requirements and also the design you've defined them correctly or accurately. Requirements verification constitutes a check by the business analysts and key stakeholders to determine the requirements and design are ready for validation. So that means you are ready to take it into validation and also provides the information needed for further work to be performed. So at times, verify requirements and validate requirement can be confusing. A high quality specification is well written and easily understood by its intended audience. A high quality model follows a formal or informal notation standard and effectively represents reality. So after you must have written out whatever requirements you want to use for the solution. Also, you have the model. So these would be verified to make sure that they are correct, they are up to standard. So the model actually represents or puts the flow in a picture form that everyone understands it. So, the most important characteristics of quality requirement and design is fitness for use. So, are we able to use this? Does this align with what we want? They must meet needs of stakeholders who will use them for a particular purpose. Quality is ultimately determined by stakeholders. So, what input will you be using? Requirement specified and model. That is any requirement, design, or set of those may be verified to ensure that the test is well structured and the matrices and modeling notations are used correctly. That is the flows and the pointers. So verify requirements, input, outputs, guidelines, and tools. So input here is requirements specified and modeled. So requirement life cycle management tools is what would guide you. So you're verifying requirements. The output will be requirements verified. So tags using this will be approved requirement. So going into the element, the first is characteristics of requirement and design quality. So while quality is ultimately determined by needs of the stakeholders who will use the requirements or the designs, acceptable quality requirement exhibit many of the following characteristics. So let's look at the characteristics of acceptable quality design. Atomic, self-contained, and capable of being understood independently of other requirements or design. So you are able to, understand that independently of any other design or requirement. Complete enough to guide further work and at the appropriate level of detail for work to continue. The level of completeness required differs based on perspective or methodology as well as point in the life cycle where the requirement is being examined or represented. Consistent. So there's consistency there. There's no confusion. Aligned with the identified needs of stakeholders and not conflicting with other requirements. So this talks to what the stakeholders need. This talks to the system that needs to be built, and it doesn't, like there's no disjoint there. It's concise, so contains no extraneous unnecessary content. Feasible, this is reasonable and possible within the agreed upon risk, schedule and budget, or considered feasible enough to investigate further through experimental prototypes. Ambiguous, the requirement must be clearly stated in such a way that to make it clear whether a solution does or does not meet the associated need. Testable, able to verify that the requirement or design has been fulfilled. Acceptable levels of verifying fulfillment depends on level of abstraction of the requirement or design. Prioritize, ranked, grouped, or negotiated in terms of importance, value against all other requirements. Understandable, represented using common terminology of the audience. Verification activities. Verification activities are typically performed iteratively throughout the requirement analysis process. So, verification activities include checking for compliance with organizational performance standards for business analysis, such as using the right tools and methods, checking for correct use of modeling notation, templates, or forms, checking for completeness with each model, comparing each model against other relevant models, checking for elements that are mentioned in one model that but are missing in the other models, and verify that elements are referenced consistently, ensuring the terminology used in expressing the requirement is understandable to stakeholders and consists with the use of those terms within the organization, and adding the examples where appropriate for clarification. Checklists. Checklists are used for quality control when verifying requirements and design. Checklists may include a standard set of quality elements that business analysts use to verify the requirements, or they may be specifically developed to capture issues of concern. The purpose of checklists is to ensure that items determined to be important are included in the final requirement deliverables, or that steps required for verification process are followed. So checklists are very, very important if you are able to keep them so that you know where you are, what you need to do, and what needs to be done. So, guidelines and tools here. We just have one, which is the requirement lifecycle management tools. Some tools have functionality to check for issues related to many of the characteristics, such as atomic, unambiguous, and prioritized techniques. Acceptable acceptance and evaluation criteria. Very, very important. So, used to ensure that the requirements are stated clearly enough to devise a set of tests that can prove that the requirements have been met. Item tracking used to ensure that any problems or issues identified during verification are managed and resolved. Matrices and key performance indicators, KPIs used to identify how to evaluate the quality of the requirement. Reviews used to inspect requirements documentation to identify requirements that are not of acceptable quality. So, stakeholders, all stakeholders, the business analyst in conjunction with the domain and implementation subject matter expert has the primary responsibility for determining that this task has been completed. Other stakeholders may discover problematic requirements during requirement communication. Therefore, all stakeholders could be involved in this task. Output. So, what you're expecting as your output is requirement verified, a set of requirements or design that is of sufficient quality to be used as basis for further work. So I hope this was of good use to you, and we're going to go into validate requirement after we must have verified our requirement. Thank you.